WWT presents Experts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, as always. So, cyber attacks against the U.S. Department of Defense are increasing year over year and have been for some time. This leaves DoD agencies feeling continuously threatened and ever vigilant. So today we're going to be talking with two WWT experts about how these agencies can stay ahead of adversaries by implementing best practices, hunting threats proactively, leveraging threat intelligence data, automating routine security tasks, and much more. So joining us are first Dr. Tim Robinson, who is a seasoned cybersecurity expert and former U.S. Marine with over 20 years of service. He's currently a Principal Solutions Architect here at Worldwide Technology and specializes in developing cutting-edge security solutions for our clients in the Department of Defense and in the intelligence community. With a doctorate in cybersecurity and a wealth of experience in cyber operations, he's really at the forefront of protecting critical information systems. Also joining us is Brian Tillett, who is director of our Public Sector Cybersecurity Advisory Team. Brian has over 25 years of experience as a senior cybersecurity advisor, and he's guided top executives in global organizations in transforming cybersecurity into a mission enabler and a competitive advantage. From delivering congressional testimony to leading global programs for the U.S. military, Brian is a trusted leader and really an expert across industries and governments around the world. Gentlemen, thanks for coming. I'm glad you're here.
Matt, thanks for having us.
Yeah, same here, Matt. It's good to be here today.
Yeah, good to see you. All right, well, let's jump right in. So, Tim, I want to ask you the first question here. So, what are you seeing as key cyber challenges for the Department of Defense this year, and how can a more proactive approach help?
Well, Matt, I'm just gonna say it outright. The problems that I'm seeing this year are pretty much the same problems that we've been seeing over the course of many years, right? I think one of the primary things we deal with is understanding your assets. So think of network visibility, personnel visibility. You know, questions you should be asking yourself is who's on my network, what's on my network, and with who and what should they be doing what they're doing on our network, right? So that's kind of like the first step. I think if you're talking DoD, another thing that we tend to deal with is this notion that soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, they rotate in, they rotate out. So if you get somebody that shows up, you train them to be very proficient at their job, and then in the next couple of years, you need to figure out, okay, so how am I going to replace that talent that just rotated out of here? What I would submit to several of these organizations is reach out, get help, understand how to know what's on your network, right? Whether that's gaining telemetry from software, and in terms of training people, you can also reach out to kind of set a basis for what that knowledge that you need in-house. You can get contracts, you can get partners like Worldwide to come in to help you understand and answer those very critical and hard questions, and also to train that workforce to be able to be proficient against thwarting those attacks.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, so one of the things that it wouldn't be a properly timed session here unless we had AI in the conversation. So just thinking about what Tim was getting at here with shadow IT and things. So having shadow IT, having a device on the network, that's always been a problem. But now we've got devices out there and processes that are thinking for themselves, and the ramifications of having that in the environment and what that can have here is just all that more important to get our arms around.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brian, how can operations leadership really encourage and support more proactive strategies?
Well, I like this question. I thank you for that. So one of the things that is most important here is creating efficiency across a cybersecurity organization. That's engineering, that's architecture, that's operations. So and the whole thing also is balancing the IT organization. Very often we see the IT and the security teams pointing at each other. So one is yes, I want to make this happen. I want to make something support the mission. And then security team is a Dr. No, or a mission inhibitor, if you will. So being able to bring everybody to the table and say the security team not be a Dr. No, but say yes, but, or yes, how. So being able to all row in the same direction. And one of my my favorite thought processes here is the more we work together to build something, the more we trust the outcome. So again, having security engaged from the get-go instead of bolted on at the end, and having the mission level impact across the entire spectrum of what it is we're trying to build here. And that goes from anybody down from the frame room all the way up to the executive staff on Mahogany Row at the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, if I could add to that, great response, Brian. One of the things I want to kind of impress upon our viewers is we need to foster a culture of, say, innovation and improvement, like, continuous, it's not just continuous monitoring. It's like, if I were to submit one statement to our viewers, it's, if there's something that's going to change, it's going to be, things in cybersecurity. So as cybersecurity changes, we need to be able to adapt to those changes. So if we foster our culture of collaboration, of understanding how we need to continuously adapt to those threats, I think we'd be much better off in the long run.
Well, Tim, I'm curious as well, how can security operations really leverage the existing data and technology investments they've made to reduce their attack surfaces? Because that seems like an important approach.
You know what? It is an important approach, and that is a great question. I'm super excited about it because one of the things we do at Worldwide is workshops, whether it's a rationalization workshop to be able to understand what you have in your security architecture, to be able to help you understand what you need to do to make decisions with regards to what we need to add to or take away to kind of reduce that attack surface. So if I were to submit to our users today, I would say, hey, let's take an active inventory of what we have. And there's a lot of situations that I've been in where you have a piece of software or hardware and you're not leveraging it to its maximum capability. Now, I'm not saying to get a firewall and or an IDS and turn all the knobs and buttons on. What I am saying is, understand what your mission is, what you need to do from a cybersecurity standpoint, understand the tools in the inventory that you have, and then go from there. It's not all the time that you're gonna need to buy an additional piece of equipment, a piece of software to make yourself more effective at your job. What you really need to do is understand, how can I leverage what I have, whether it's an educational from an educational standpoint, can I understand a little bit more? Can I learn a little bit more about this piece of technology I have to make it much more effective in my daily use?
Mm-hmm.
I'll also add that I think one of the worst premises in cybersecurity is I've met some security leaders and teams, and they've had a thought process of no tool left behind. So they want everything in the environment, and all too often we're just choked down with the amount of logs, the amount of intelligence we're receiving, and we're forced with too much chaff in order to be able to see exactly what we need to be paying attention to. So anything we can do to add proficiency to our technologies. We have a tremendous amount of shelfware from a cybersecurity standpoint in the DoD, across the rest of the federal civilian agencies as well. So having that rationalization conversation, right? This is what the organization is entitled to. This is what we are not using. What else can we do with perhaps some, not capital expenditure, but something a little bit lower impact to actually change what the technology is doing, garner more value. I hate using that word value in public sector, but how can we get more out of what we're paying for without buying another shiny widget the next time a security incident takes place? So taking a full inventory of your capabilities and making sure how to tweak those dials that Tim just mentioned according to each mission. Protecting the cafeteria room is completely different than protecting a missile silo, and being able to address those risks according to what we're trying to protect is incredibly important. Probably more so, but most definitely more so in the DoD than across the enterprise or other types of organizations.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brian, I know that you love the practice of threat hunting. So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about that, and what are the core elements of a successful proactive threat hunting program?
Yeah, well, trying not to date myself here, but some times that I've spent with some of the infrastructure vendors as well as the cybersecurity vendors, one of the most important things around cybersecurity hunting is to understand the principle of you can't detect something abnormal unless you know what normal is in the first place. So being able to take an inventory and establish this is what typically happens in my environment on any given day or any given week or month or some type of time frame. And from a threat hunting perspective, kind of looking at it from also a cloud-based perspective, but also the network-based perspective is How often are my internal entities, my internal teams talking to each other? At what rates? At what amounts of data? If I have a process and a team that is typically processing 12 gigs of information across the network per week, and all of a sudden on a random Friday, I see 75 gigs of information happen. Well, what happened in the environment that created that anomaly? And that's where we can start looking and say, all right, now I have an indicator of something I need to investigate. Maybe not an indicator of compromise, but now I need to go take inventory of everything around that particular team, that particular application, that particular tool, and start paying attention to why that anomaly took place. And now I can start reverse engineering where my patient zero is or where my infiltration happened. And again, that's before an indicator of compromise. It's really just an indicator of something I need to go investigate. And again, back to my time with the networking teams and the security teams, being able to embrace NetFlow. So we've got most of our infrastructure is mostly up to date. So as I said, getting more bang for your buck, getting more of the technologies invested in. So I've got NetFlow. How do I turn it on and how do I use it from the security team as opposed to just using it to see, is the network working correctly? Being able to embrace it from a security perspective is where we need to lean on the network side with NetFlow.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I'm going to jump in there again. I'm sorry. Yep. Brian said some things that triggered a response in me. I think he talked about information sharing. I think we don't impress upon our customers enough that is critically important, right? If something is happening on the East Coast, if you're hunting threats on the East Coast, if you're seeing some anomalous activity that's germane to your coast, there's going to be a large probability that it's going to happen on the West Coast as well. So when you're seeing one thing somewhere, you need to establish what type of information sharing practices that we can put in place to be able to help the enterprise overall.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, that's interesting. You just brought up intelligence sharing, and that sort of leads into a question I have for you about how defense organizations can do a better job of integrating intelligence sharing to enhance their overall security posture. And I'm curious if that's more of a people problem, a process problem, a technology problem, or maybe a cultural problem, or some one of all of those.
Well, man, I think you're right. I think it's probably a little bit of all of those. There are softwares that allow us to share threat intelligence information, but I think from a process standpoint, organizations need to understand what can you share and how can you share it, but not just those two. How can you do it in a timely fashion so decision makers can make decisions on that threat intelligence data that you have?
Yeah, and I'll also add to that is not only sharing across our government organizations, our DoD, different teams, different commands, et cetera, but embracing the partner community out there, specifically the security partners that have footprints of technology and sensors around the world. So, we have this notion of, our air gap networks and IL5, IL6, and different types of, security level of across the government. But being able to embrace, what certain security vendors are seeing around the world and be able to bounce that intelligence off of them. I think of like the Unit 42 from Palo Alto, and I think of the Talos organization from Cisco, and how can we leverage their intelligence and make it relevant to what we're seeing in our own environment? Those are some of the things which there's always room for improvement on those information sharing initiatives.
Gigamon offers a deep observability pipeline that efficiently delivers network-derived intelligence to cloud, security, and observability tools, helping organizations to eliminate security blind spots, reduce tool costs, and better secure and manage hybrid cloud infrastructure.
Well, I want to turn now to automation, and I love how we think about that, our expression of automate everything right, automating the right things and automating them correctly, and I know that's an important aspect here. So, Brian, how are organizations using automation to improve all the security operations workflows that they have?
And this kind of harkens back to one of our earlier questions here is, how can security ops work with engineering and such? The notion of how can we measure how well we're doing here? And one of the things that we can do, and a strong initiative here, is how can we reduce chair swiveling? How can I reduce the amount of time I need to focus on this console and this console? Every single vendor that comes in says, I'm going to give you a single pane of glass. Well, if you've got 27 of those, now you have 27 single panes of pain. And what can you do to automate the intelligence, automate the artifacts that are happening between the two of them to actually present you an incident in real time? So also the notion of, when does incident detection stop? When have I convicted that I have something that I need to respond to? And when does incident response begin? So being able to well define those in playbooks and be able to act upon those no matter what is happening in the environment. These are things that really get stood up before we go live. And of course, we're not building a new organization here. But when we talk about revamping and moving in new technologies, being able to build in those operational, mission-based playbooks and create a success criteria to say, all right, this is what we want to see in proof of concept, and then move it into production. Being able to get those things defined and move into them and create that success criteria from the beginning, I think, is paramount.
Well, Tim, I'm curious from your point of view, like, what are the metrics or KPIs that you recommend defense organizations track to, justify further cybersecurity investments, and also to kind of keep an eye on what they're doing and make sure they're doing it well?
Oh, sure. I'm going to keep this simple in threes: mean time to detection, mean time to response, and we'll just do a count of the number of incidents that you see on a day-to-day basis and that you respond to on the day-to-day basis. Now, let's kind of unpack mean time to detection. So there are threats. There's always going to be threats on our network. It's just a matter of time when you find one, right? So what we would like to see is, if there's a threat that's known to the community, we'd like our infrastructure architecture to be able to see it. Right. And we're talking real time. So the ability to be able to measure that is very critical. And then mean time to respond. So once you detect something, you need to be able to respond to something. Just because you detected it does not necessarily mean that you have an action plan to be able to respond. And that action plan, sometimes you need to bring a couple of people together to talk about how you're going to do things, because in an operational environment, you just can't turn knobs. You just can't turn things off whenever you see fit. When there's a scare, you can't shut things down, because you got people people depending on those networks to be able to do their daily job. So mean time to detection, finding it out, mean time to response, how quickly can you come up with a response mechanism to do it? And then on the back end, finding out if we're actually reducing the number of incidents that we see across the board that could limit us from doing our job.
One of the other things I want to add to that, and something that's not necessarily as fancy or attractive in the cybersecurity world, is addressing vulnerability, specifically vulnerability management. So how can you measure how well you are patching your vulnerabilities over time? If you're looking at services like penetration testing, if you're looking at compliance type of technologies and being able to use your patching technologies across the environment, being able to measure how well that's acting over time is also an indicator of how well your security posture is. And being able to bring that also into what I like to call a closed loop remediation, if you will. So as we were talking earlier, Tim was talking about mean time to detect, mean time to respond. You might also measure mean time to mitigate. You might not necessarily want to measure how fast you mitigate a threat, because you might want to gain intelligence and hand it over to somebody that can go for and maybe go knock on somebody's door or kick a door in. But also this notion of closed loop remediation. So if I had a vulnerability that was exploited, I've got an indicator of compromise, I have an incident, then I've responded to it. What am I going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? How can I take that entire picture of everything I just described and put it in my CBT and my computer-based training for next October's Cybersecurity Awareness Month? So being able to make sure everything is recognized as operationally relevant in each organization, that is going to improve the overall cybersecurity hygiene of the staff, of the troops. And therefore, we've always said, if we could remove the carbon from the equation, and we just had silicone everywhere, we could have no problems out there. But guess what? Silicone is vulnerable, and we're always going to have carbon. So being able to, again, build those things in from that closed loop perspective is incredibly important over time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, what emerging technologies or approaches are we seeing out there that are significantly impacting cybersecurity operations in the defense sector? And Tim, I'll have you start with that.
Sure. Matt, I think probably the largest one that we're faced with in the DoD space is zero trust. This whole idea of trust nothing, right? Verify everything. It's great. And I think the DoD has done a great job between DISA and NSA. They've done a great job with outlaying how you best accomplish that across fiscal years, right? So it's not a waterfall methodology that you would implement, meaning that's not a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Rather, it's a, hey, here's what we have to do. Here's the time limit in which we have to do it. You figure out the best plan to be able to do that. So zero trust is one. I think AI and ML, I love to see where that's going to go. I think this idea of automate your automation, right? I started toying with that idea, understanding how to leverage automation to be able to automate predetermined actions to specific threats, right? If you have a human in a loop, that can tend to slow things down. Brian talked about gathering intel. I do agree with that. Sometimes I don't agree with that, because sometimes I think you want to go ahead and stop the threats from happening. So if I have the ability to be able to automate, number one, that detection, and then to be able to automate how I respond to that detection, I think it's gonna provide dividends, especially when you're forward downrange on the battlefield. You have all the stimulus coming in, and you as a leader have to make a decision very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And just to dovetail on that, as Tim had, and we even started the conversation with this, so AI or generative AI, there's two notions of bringing AI into the environment. One is security for AI, and then there's AI for cybersecurity. So how are we securing our AI processes? How are we making sure that they're doing what we expect them to do and they're not doing anything else? But also, how are we leveraging the AI that are built into the cybersecurity solutions and the platforms that are coming out of the major cybersecurity vendors? They are building in their intelligence from their footprint around the world to be able to automate what they've seen and inject it into the security platforms, which are in our security operations center. So being able to embrace that and being able to say, all right, this is what AI is allowing us to do to move quickly. I mentioned earlier, what can I do to reduce chair swiveling? So integrating the technologies together, orchestrating responses with playbooks, and then having a level of trust around AI specific to each individual mission or command or whatever else it is we're trying to protect at an entity standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Matt, if I could jump in, I have one. In the Marine Corps, we called it saved round. If everybody has said what they have to say, and you have something else to say, it's a saved round. So I have a saved round for all of our Marine Corps viewers. Quantum cryptography. That's huge, Matt. It's in almost every conversation we have. How do we when quantum becomes available on your desktop, meaning when it's pervasive, when everybody has the ability to crack encryption leveraging quantum computing, how do we defend ourselves against that? So quantum cryptography is a huge topic. Ricky Boyd, who is a counterpart of ours, he will talk to you day in and day out about quantum cryptography and how important it is. I just think that's something that we want to double click on and make sure our users know, our viewers know that that is something that we want to think about right now.
Yeah, and Tim, I'm both very excited and intellectually curious about quantum computing, and also a little bit scared of it, to be frank. But and I want to ask y'all to build on that a little bit more in terms of like looking even further out into the future. Because I always like to kind of end asking our experts to prognosticate a bit. So if you look out the next 5 years, maybe it's quantum, maybe it's AI, maybe it's something else. What do you think is going to have the most impact on cybersecurity within kind of the Department of Defense space? What are you excited to see that you think is coming up?
I'll jump in first on that. And my thought process is it's not necessarily around the process or the technology or the approaches that we've talked about previously here. I think it's about people. So we have this notion, people, process, technology. I look at the talent that we want to bring into our military, into our contractors, being able to recognize their youth and their exuberance and their want to connect everything together. In the military and DoD and the air-gapped and other community networks, we don't really plug things together. And I think we need to embrace our willingness and our desire from our new talent that's coming in and be able to enable that across cybersecurity here. So as I was mentioning, intelligence sharing, reducing chair swiveling. The only way you do that is by connecting things together. And that's always kind of been a little bit hesitant. We've been hesitant to do that in cybersecurity. So being able to address the talent and embrace their new ideas, I think is important.
For me, it's going to be autonomous automation systems, right? Autonomous security systems. Not to freak everybody out, but I used to love watching Terminator and this notion of the computers are going to take over, right? So we're living in a day and age now to where we're starting to see unmanned aerial vehicles. We're starting to see unmanned ground vehicles. We're starting to leverage AI and ML, but those systems to make decisions very quickly or to push back data very quickly. We're outfitting those platforms with multiple systems. So we're gaining all of this telemetry so that it's a bunch of data that we have to sift through very quickly to make decisions. I'm super excited to see where this is going. I think we should lift the hood and explore what we can actually do with autonomous security systems.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for spending some time today and sharing your expertise. Thanks for coming.
Hey, man, I just want to say thanks for having me. The Marines were here first. We've landed, so everything's safe.
Yeah, and Tim and Matt, thanks again for having me here as well. So myself being prior Air Force and with the little bit of gentle ribbing between the services, I think it's great to have these different perspectives and be able to blend these different concepts where we're coming in. And it is what we truly need to do to actually move the needle forward and reduce risk and be able to measure that over time. So it's great to be able to collaborate on sessions like this.
I appreciate that wrap up. And hey, thank you for joining us today as well. This is one of several episodes we have about how we're approaching things, technologies, operations to achieve mission outcomes for Department of Defense. So if you enjoyed this, check out those other episodes, and that and much, much more is out on WWT.com. A great catalog of video content you can watch at any time, and a calendar of stuff that's coming up that you're going to want to book your calendar and not miss out on. So check that out. Love to hear your feedback. Take the survey if you get it. Drop us an email. Let us know how we did. We'd be delighted to connect you with experts like the ones you've heard from today. And with that, we'll wrap today's session. Hey, thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.